Welcome to the Sisterhood of Healing podcast, the podcast that wants to help you reach your best and most divine potential. Each week, we dive into topics concerning inner healing, wellness, and spirituality. We discuss strategies and practice from our own personal experiences regarding higher energies, trauma, and connecting to the divine as we take you through our own personal journeys to discover the highest versions of ourselves. In combination with guest speakers, we bring you a comprehensive guide to mental and spiritual wellness and the ability to connect to yourself and the world around you on a deeper level. I'm Nicole, and I'm Christina, and we are two sisters who want to take you along on our spiritual and healing journey. We are each on our own individual healing and spiritual path and bring unique perspectives regarding yoga, chakra healing, meditation, intuition, and trauma healing. Sometimes life is messy, sometimes it's confusing, and sometimes everything falls perfectly into place. Join us as we navigate the path to divine enlightenment together.
Hello, sisters, brothers, and non-binary listeners to the Sisterhood of Healing podcast. On today's episode, we're talking hypnosis for healing with James Stephen. Welcome, James. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on to the podcast today.
Yeah, real excited to be here.
No, we're super excited to talk hypnosis and learn more about this. So thank you so much. So we'll get started. If you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, professionally, I'm a hypnotist and practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. I specialize in helping people get over breakups, relationships. I also help people with grief, and I also just help people build the identity that they want and how to get them in touch using things like hypnosis and really shift that inner perspective to really shift the world around them and become the person that they want to be.
Very cool. And what's your origin story? Like, how did you get into this? Because I don't come across very many people who know about this, let alone do it.
Well, it starts, I guess, back, as a hobby. Growing up as a teenager, I got into street magic. I used to do card tricks, perform on the streets, perform in bars, just as a hobby. And one of the bars I frequent in the city I live in, the bartender brought up hypnosis one night, and something went off in my head where I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I started reading about it, and it only took about 6 or 7 days, but I came back to that same bar and I started doing hypnosis in the bar on strangers. So really the first angle I approached hypnosis from was entertainment. I was an entertainer, and I still am. I still have the habit of bringing a pack of cards with me wherever I go. And, hypnosis, I got, interestingly enough, I found it difficult to hypnotize myself at first. But when I went to go get trained and certified in hypnosis, when I was really put in that place of trance and things like that, so much changed for me. And that's when I really just knew that, this is something I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And that's sort of how I got into where I am today.
Did you talk about hypnotizing yourself? That's something you can do?
Yes, actually, that is actually one tool I like to teach my clients is self-hypnosis, because I think it's one thing to help someone with a problem, but I think it's another thing to not only help them with that problem, but give them the tools to tackle future problems. That's sort of my philosophy when I work with people.
That's so neat. And is it the same technique, different techniques as you would if someone else was hypnotizing you, or if you were hypnotizing someone else?
Well, we're all different in the way we, kind of process the world. So for certain people, certain inductions work better than others. There's a very small, sometimes they're my favorite client, but there's a small percentage of the population that are very suggestible. So the inductions aren't really complicated. It doesn't take long, and they can get into a nice deep trance fairly quickly. For the rest of us, there are guided methods. There's ways, I tend to work online. So most of the people I work with it's a very guided process, but if it's very similar to meditation. In fact, if you meditate or do anything of the sort, even doing yoga, I would say, you already have a skill into going into trance. It might not be the same trance as hypnosis, but it's, a trance nonetheless.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Well, what makes someone like more suggestible than someone else? Like how, like, are
Yeah.
there characteristics? Is it just a greater willingness, a greater intuition? Like, what is it?
Well, that's the interesting thing is there's not really any rhyme or reason, but I'm not sure if any of you have ever seen a stage hypnosis show. I know a lot of like colleges and universities have them. And the interesting thing is they take like 25 people up on stage and they do these exercises to like hone in on who's the most suggestible. And that's when, by the end of the show, there's maybe only like 5 to 8 people on stage, because those are the people who are reacting, the quickest to the suggestions. But once again, like I said, it for most people, it can just be a guided process. And everyone's unique. I'm very much, I did education testing when I was young, and I'm very much a verbalist. So when it comes to understanding concepts, the verbal approach for me works really well with hypnosis. But for some other people, it might be something like kinesthetic or something visual or a combination of all three. So it really, that when there's so many ways to induce hypnosis, and if you practice enough, types, there's probably a method out there for you that's worth trying.
That's so cool.
Mhm.
I've definitely seen, when I was in university, every year they had, I can't remember who it was, but they had a hypnotist come every week or every year during Frosh Week. So those people that were hypnotized, they were legitimately hypnotized then. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, stage hypnosis is a bit of a different, like I wouldn't say it's the same as something more related to healing, because I also think there's an aspect of trance, but there's also an aspect of context where it's like, well, I'm on stage, everyone's goofing off, so there's a bit more of a drive to match the behaviors, but still a lot of the mechanisms are the same for the inductions. So yeah.
So what are those like standard mechanisms for inductions?
Well, one of the ones, at least, and I would use the same methods in street hypnosis. One would be like clasping the hands together and getting the subject to look at their fingers. And I would say, like really squeeze your hand tightly. And the interesting thing is, when you do that, your fingers naturally will start to move closer. And we're using that as a window, but rather than saying like, oh, this is what's actually happening, you suggest that you have some power over it, or being like, yeah, with your mind, and it opens up that little bit of suggestibility where that critical part of the person's brain is going like, wait, something might be going on here. So it's that was certainly one of my favorites. There's another one with pattern interrupts, actually, and pattern interrupts are probably the most visual flair. Stage hypnotists do them, street hypnotists do them, and it's when they go in for a handshake and they kind of like they'll yank the gently, if they're doing it properly, they'll sort of interrupt the handshake pattern and tug on their wrist and maybe say a command like sleep. And what that does is it creates a spike in brain activity where you've just been interrupted, because like naturally, if someone sticks their hand out to you, culturally, we have that impulse to do the same, right? And if you were to interrupt that, all of a sudden your brain's kind of like, wait, what should I do next? And that's when the hypnotist can step in and give a suggestion. If you want something that's even more, that happens naturally with no hypnotist there, is what has ever happened to your train of thought when you walk through a door and you go to pull it open and it's a push door? Yeah, it's like yeah, it's just like your internal dialogue, whatever it is, it comes to a screeching halt because your program that you're using, that your mind is using, that pattern that it knows, all of a sudden just it misfires. So that is actually another, another way to induce hypnosis and suggestibility.
Really, I'm just like, wow, so cool. I'm thinking of the movie Inception right now, how they go down like so many levels and there's always like a kick that jars someone awake, or they always have to like figure out like that one moment. That's what I'm thinking of with the interruption. So interesting. So maybe they in that movie they took a little bit of something from hypnosis in that.
Actually, there's a great thing about hypnosis actually is metaphor and story. You can tell stories in an induced trance as well. And it's very fascinating that you brought up Inception, because there's something called stacking realities, and the idea of telling a narrative where you start a story and you tell about 50% of the story or 60%, and then you start a new story, you tell 60% of that. You start a new story, tell 60% of that. And by the time you get to the fourth layer, you are just talking directly to the subconscious mind that you can then wrap up that story, wrap up the other story, wrap it up, and like tie a little bow on it, and the mind will lock that away, very much exactly like the plot of Inception. So that's
that is fascinating.
So how important is the subconscious then when it comes to hypnotism, or like healing from hypnotism?
Well, the subconscious is, or the unconscious, I told to go with that, and most people say they're changeable. I mean, it really takes care of everything that you're not conscious of right now. I mean, from digesting your food to beating your heart, these are all things that your body does with no awareness. Maybe if you're really good at meditating, you can slow your heart or things like that. But it has access to all the functions of the body. And when we really think about that, I've actually done work in a tattoo parlor where I've induced anesthesia by suggestion. And once again, for any skeptics out there of like hypnosis isn't real or it's all made up, I highly recommend they look into medical hypnosis or surgery hypnosis, because you'll see people who are wide awake with no anesthesia, completely cut open and talking and things like that. It's such a fascinating thing. So the unconscious mind is really like everything you're not consciously aware of. There's a bit of a rule in hypnosis that we're on average aware of about 7 to 9 things, maybe 5 to 9 things at once, and then the rest kind of sits in our unconscious.
That's so cool.
So much about the brain we don't know, and I think hypnosis kind of proves that.
Yeah, it's certainly what I like to think of, like it's like the weird, mysterious, magical sister of psychology.
That is. Who knows, like the black sheep of the psychology family.
Yeah, well, Sigmund Freud originally was trained to be a hypnotist back in the day before he got into his current field. So that was it was a very interesting time, because in the early days of hypnosis were about animal magnetism, mesmerism. In fact, like Anton Mesmer, the guy who, thought, they used to rub their hands or create these magnetic fields, and they realized, at the time, it was just a placebo effect. But what they didn't realize is it wasn't a placebo effect. It sort of was, but it was much more of a suggestion and a suggestible effect. And once again, Anton Mesmer was a guy who was back in the day doing like bloodletting for one of his patients, and he forgot his blood clotting magnets. And what they used to do is run magnets over wounds and they clot. But the thing is, the magnets didn't do anything. It was the suggestion that they would clot, which caused the wounds to clot and the blood to stop flowing. So Anton Mesmer just decided to pick up a stick and wave a wand over the wounds, and once again, just through suggestion, and the patients blood clotted. So it was very, rather than him thinking like, oh, this must be suggestion, and he thought, I am the great mesmer, I have special powers. But so it did fall out for a while with the scientific community, but in the early 20th century, it started to get a lot more traction.
So how do you use hypnosis on your clients? Like, what does a typical session look like?
It really varies depending on what the client needs. I like to generally, I don't really want to have a client that keeps coming back. I kind of want to get them through the process and equip them with what they need as soon as possible. So I tend to do about 2 to 3 sessions with the client. And really, yeah, it depends. I mean, I've also, I work with, like, example, grief, for example. Grief is a very natural part of life, obviously. And sometimes we get stuck in it, just like a bad breakup, there's time to mourn, there's time to process the emotion. And then sometimes there's a part of us that just can't really let it go. And as much as we try to think about it, and I had a client about a year ago who was a great client, very great at going into trance. But she had lost 2 family members and was having nightmares and, constantly seeing them in their dream. And they're really having a difficult time of letting go. And we just did one session, and I followed them up the next week, and they were finally sleeping well again. And I even followed them up a week later after that, and they began dating again. After all this loss that they experienced. And once again, I think emotions, whether it's from our traumas as children, or the negative patterns we have, I think hypnosis is a really great tool on telling that other part of the body, the emotional part of the body, the feeling part of the body, that it's okay to let go. You can let go. And so yeah, in that example, that's like a one-off session that worked out great. Other clients I work with, 2 or 3 times. That's on average what it takes, but depending on what we're working with, it can take a little more, sometimes less. So yeah, it's a bit of a case by case basis.
And how long is a typical session, or is that again case by case?
Yeah, it is case by case. I mean, once again, when I hit the lottery and I get that, super easy to go into trance client, sessions can last for anywhere from like 10 to 30 minutes. Granted, when I do my consultations, I do spend a lot of time on those. So I before we even do the session, I generally talk to the person about their issues for about an hour or even 90 minutes. And that really is when we figure out what we need to do, what we map out, and whether they need that 2 sessions, 3 session package, or it's just a one-off session. So that's really the process.
And in, like, when you're helping, like, maybe just to clarify for listeners, and I'm curious too, like, when you're helping your clients, helping them process really difficult emotions like grief or loss or what have you, you're helping, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're helping them actually like process it and unblock things. You're not just like helping them forget so they don't have to deal with it.
No. It's this process of letting go. And grief and breakups there's a slight bit overlap, right? A person's no longer, one important in their life is no longer with them. And whether that's by tragedy of death or accident or just natural causes, or the person is out of their life for whatever reasons, we go through this process, this like detoxification emotional process. And for some people, they get over things fast. For other people, it takes a long time. And once again, it's normal to feel lost. It's normal, to dwell on these things for a period of time. And, I wouldn't ever recommend just like having a bad breakup and then going right to a hypnotic trance to say I'm going to cut all the cords with this, but once again, it's when that person, that client, or that person I'm working with feels like, you know what, it's been long enough, I'm ready to let go. And in fact, if you are thinking of seeking a hypnosis session, whether that's for me or any other hypnotist out there, like your mind is already ready to start making shifts on a subconscious level that you might not even be aware of it, but it's the idea of seeking help. And the great thing about hypnosis, and in my personal experience in life, is that our brains are like filtering pattern systems. And when we have these really repeating patterns about, whether it's our thought patterns, who we think of ourselves to be, the mind will prove it. What the thinker thinks, the prover will prove. And I think that prover is sort of the unconscious mind at times. So, yeah.
So, what are some questions that people can ask themselves to shift their thoughts on their own?
Well, it depends on the issue, but I know with people, I work with people who sometimes have a negative self-image, or working on self-esteem, or even building self-esteem after relationships. And a lot of people who are very anxious, which, hey, I'm in that camp. I can jump 50 steps ahead in the worst direction, like a chess master. Only it's not useful. And in fact, that is a phrase of power that I use a lot. Is how is that useful? Because I think whether you're an anxious person or just your average person, there's been those times that we get caught up and we start to worry, and that worry starts to snowball. And how often has that worry actually manifested or panned out? Almost never.
Mhm.
And I think a really big change over the past 10 years in understanding how the mind works and understanding how the brain works is something called neuroplasticity. And it's that idea that like our brains are kind of like snow. It's like a thing of snow, where if you go down one path enough, it'll start to form and be easier to go down and faster to go down. And that's both negative and positive. And when we can start to build a new path, neurons, that there's the saying called Hebb's law, called neurons that fire together eventually wire together. So if you are a person struggling, and this isn't even just hypnosis, this is just brain science, if you are a person struggling with anxiety or self-esteem, and if you're able to create that power phrase, and if you just practice it once a day, when you hear that negativity spring up, it'll start to slowly build. And like I preach this stuff because I've gone through it, and it took me about 3 weeks, but I went from thinking about it once a day to having this new neural network grow and grow and grow till really, like, my brain had the option: should I feel good or should I worry and feel bad? Guess what my brain decided to start choosing. So that's another I think big thing that hypnosis can actually help in, because when a brain goes into trance, it actually grows new neural connections the same way it does when it goes to sleep.
Is it like an accelerated rest hypnosis, or is it just like the same level of sleep?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm putting a person to sleep, because there is a waking aspect to it, but the brainwave is very similar. And once again, like, what's a great example? Oh, problem solving. I mean, it's everywhere around the world. How it's always like, let's sleep on it. If you've ever had a puzzle you've worked with, like I play video games from time to time, and sometimes there'll be a puzzle, and I work with the configurations and I can't figure it out. And I rack my brain, and my mind knows what I'm focusing on. And then I walk away from it, I go to sleep, I come back maybe a day or two later, and I try out this puzzle. All of a sudden there's just a click, and I find out the configuration and it seems so obvious, and it's like, wow, how'd that happen? And actually, hypnosis is really good for accelerated learning. And that is another thing that I'm currently I like to experiment on myself, but there is something with a deep trance identification, where during the Cold War, the Soviets actually experimented with Russian music students, and they got the music students to go into trance, live the lives of their virtuosos in their instruments, and then come out of trance. And sort of this tapped into that part of the monkey see, monkey do part of the brain, the mirror neurons is what they call them. And the kids who or the musicians who went through this process versus a controlled group that didn't performed much, much better. So it is very much so a learning tool. And that almost like playing pretend in trance will actually enhance you in so many ways. Really, it's a way to interface with that part of your body that just knows how to do things.
And so they were living in trance. So they were under a state of hypnosis for like in their like going about their daily lives.
Yeah. Oh, not like walking around like in a daydream, but like they would have sessions, and in these sessions, they would imagine that they were like living, kind of in the same way you can remember your whole life in sort of like a quick slideshow in your head. And in fact, this mechanism, deep trance identification, it's even more powerful the more you know about the person you want to emulate. So if there's someone who inspires you, whether that's a musician, or political figure or a writer, if you want to really tap into their genius in a way, one of the things you can do is like watch a biopic on them, read a book written by them, and the more information you have, the more that monkey see, monkey do part of your brain is going to be able to pick up on it. When I was a teenager, I used to watch music videos of of my favorite bands, and even though the guitar fingering positions weren't always visible in the shots, I would be able to pick up on them for some reason, even not really having any ear training, because once again, it's that part of the tapping in our unconscious mind to speed up our learning, because our unconscious mind has so many resources, and when you get to interface with it and become friends with your unconscious, it really, you can build a great relationship and use it as a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I think we are so unaware of the things that we unconsciously do, that we've been like programmed to do. And I think just being made aware of those little things can make such incredible shifts. But I was going to ask you something. I was thinking of something when you were talking about clients and when you're ready to come in for a session, that's your mind kind of being in the right state. What happens if you have a client, or hypothetical, perhaps you've never had a client in this situation, but if you have a client who's, frustrated because, they're stuck with X, Y, or Z, and they come in and they're like, I need this fixed, but they're not willing to make the changes in their outside life. Can you still work with their subconscious on that level? Like, does hypnosis still help them? I don't know if that's a realistic question.
No, that is a good question, actually. I tend, which is why one of my consultation processes tends to be like an hour to 90 minutes, is I want to hammer things out, because I will turn down clients when I think they won't, that hypnosis isn't really the tool they need at that moment. I myself don't practice it, but a lot of hypnotists do, like quitting smoking, for example. I did it, when I started my journey as a hypnotist, I did a lot of hypnosis for friends, and I had a friend who was like, okay, I want to quit smoking, but I don't want to pay for it. But if you do a session with me, and then at the end of the month I quit smoking, then I'll pay you all this money. And I'm like, okay, you already have 5 different reasons why you don't want to have this change. So, that issue tends to spring up with clients who are sort of there not because they want to be, but maybe their spouse or their partner or someone in their life is like, you should go do, they're kind of kicking and dragging their feet, and you can help them, but once again, I think the key to being a good hypnotist is finding the right clients for you. And there might be clients out there who don't jive with me, and that's totally fine. And yeah, sometimes I've had calls for really strange requests from people who I don't think understand what hypnosis is. I've had one person call me about aliens, saying like they saw an alien. I was like, oh well,
I might not be the right one.
yeah, I'm not an alien hunter or something like that. But yeah, so that's generally how I deal with that issue, because it doesn't really spring up. But yeah.
Does fear of change ever make it more difficult for people to kind of tap into, the type of feeling that they do with you?
Yeah, well, fear of change is, whether good or bad, is I think what holds it back a lot of people. A lot of people are comfortable with their current situation, even if their current situation isn't good or good for them. Familiarity is, even negative familiarity is still familiarity. And our once again, our brains being pattern machines, when we step outside of our normal patterns, it's a real, it takes it's a massive cognitive load on us emotionally. And I think like one great example of this is like walking down the streets, in the city you live in. It's very familiar. It doesn't, like, and you go to bed and you're going about your day. But when you go on a vacation and you walk through a new city, like it's, and you try to go to bed, you don't get as deep of sleep because your brain is just, processing so much. And in fact, there's even been studies where like they'll do like small changes on streets that people know. And, you could walk by a shop 100 times and they could like change something like the color of the letters or the sign, and you wouldn't pick it up, because once again, your brain is just, it's so focused on like the little bits of that it can consciously be aware of. So you can slip by changes. And as a magician, this is something that like I do take advantage of with sleight of hand. When you behave, when I speak in my not hypnosis scripts, but if I have sort of a scripted thing with a trick, with performing a magic trick, I can use those little gaps in awareness to my advantage. Where if I look someone, just by looking someone in the eye, I found as a magician will take their focus off whatever you're doing. So yeah, it is really like, just circling back to what you said, yeah, like as far as like fear of change, hypnosis can really help shift that, I think, or at least keep us open, because another mechanism of that technique where you emulate the genius of someone you respect, you can use that same technique on the ideal you. Because I think everyone has that person that they know they wish, it's like the dream the you that solved all your problems, the you that's achieved all your dreams. And if you can become aware of that, you know exactly the steps you need to take to get there. Those steps are very scary, but sometimes big changes need to happen like drastically. And I only say that sometimes because I think what's more effective for changes are small changes that then exponentially grow. That's another way around it, I would say, in my research.
I guess they all compound. If you can't do something, if you're not maybe able to access a big change or ready for a big change, then yeah, those little things kind of build up on top of each other.
Yeah, no, another great metaphor is, a plane takes off, two planes take off from an airport, and you're looking at them. One plane makes a 6-degree turn to the left, and the other plane, doesn't. You wait 1 minute, those planes are still very close to each other, but 6 hours, those planes are going to be on completely different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, but yeah, once again, me slipping into metaphor, metaphor and hypnosis actually go hand in hand. It's that idea of, I think, language, and that's another thing I do practice. Neuro linguistic programming. It's a bit of a mouthful to explain, but the base of it being the founders, John Grinder and Richard Bandler, were able to codify the language of really effective therapists. One of them being Milton Erickson, who was a hypnotherapist, and it's like they found that the language and stories is actually how we can really, think of the last movie that really touched you. Like, was there probably something that you've experienced in that? And maybe it's a one-to-one. Maybe you can really, empathize with the character. Maybe they've gone through something you gone through, or even if that's not the case, that's something they say, but it just resonates with you. And in fact, that's hypnosis as well. In fact, so much of our lives are actually hypnotic that once we realize, like, what are the things that speak to us that are conscious, like, mind lets slip past and then touch us on a much more emotional level.
I was just gonna say, I feel like I'm gonna leave this conversation and just like be thinking about everything I do and how it relates to hypnosis.
I actually was thinking of something. Nicole and I have had this conversation many times when we're together driving in the car, but when we have driven the same route day in, day out, day in, day out, and then for like a minute and a half chunk of time, you're like, whoa, how did I get here? I was I not paying attention to the road? What is going on? Because you're so used to doing that.
That's a perfect example of trance. I mean, like, we don't want to get to the bottom of this whole interview. It's, like, what is hypnosis? What is trance? And it's a relaxed state of focus in which that critical, they call the critical faculty, kind of takes a back seat, and you're able to take in information that you otherwise might be critical of. The critical factor is something that, like, as children, we don't really have. Under the age of 8, if you tell a 5-year-old that there's a dragon outside, they're gonna check. If you tell us, if you tell an adult, at least if they're sober, they're not going to check. They're going to know. They have that frame of reference. But that's also another reason why, like, children and teenagers learn so fast, because their brains are so neuroplastic. They can have those new networks just spread out so much faster versus us. We're all neuroplastic, but just kids, it's like a superpower.
Yeah.
And so really, when I am working with people with hypnosis, it's kind of fascinating, because suggestion can just be a simple aspect of guiding. So if you're listening to this podcast right now, you might not be aware of it until I say it. And really, what if you're aware of your left foot that's in your sock? You might be physically aware of that now. Your body always knew it was there, but I've just happened to guide your focus to that point. So really, that's another example of like hypnosis, suggestion, things like that.
So just bringing your awareness to things you haven't really noticed before, and that's what kind of makes you make all those connections.
But like without the critical component, right? Like just having that awareness.
Yeah. And it's funny. Like, I found, I've studied spirituality, I guess, and a bit of like out there philosophy. And in my early 20s, I was really moved and interested by the writings of Robert Anton Wilson, and he writes extensively about these things called reality tunnels. And he's was very funny man. He never took himself seriously, which I think was made the reading of his work so much more enjoyable. And he says, as much as reality tunnels feel real, you can't take them too seriously. It's your own BS, your own belief systems, but it's your own BS. And I think using techniques like meditation, yoga, breathing techniques, you can widen those tunnels and be open to new belief systems, new information. And once again, like the thinker thinks what the prover proves. And you spend enough time in certain thought loops, you're going to start to see and it's really like, if you can believe it, your brain's going to show it to you.
So it's really like a fake it till you make it kind of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the first, when I went from not being a hypnotist, or from just being a magician to a hypnotist, I think I announced on my social media, I was just like, hey guys, I do magic. Well, I also do hypnosis now. And just under that pretense, the person I walked it up to saw me 1,000 times before, and when I put them in a trance, I was just like, oh, that worked,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's certainly, it's fascinating what the mind can be brought to believe, whether that's people goofing off on stage, or someone letting go of something painful, or getting closer to that ideal self.
So if people wanted to, or if our listeners wanted to practice a little bit of hypnosis at home to help them along their journeys, like what is something little that they could do?
Well, you know what? YouTube has countless guided meditations. And if you have I would say maybe start there if you have no experience with meditation. I think guided meditations are very good. Philosopher Alan Watts has a great guided meditation, with music and without music. And these people, they're also in their own way, they're great hypnotists. So bring your mind to that peacefulness and that stillness. But you also can find guided hypnosis tracks on YouTube, and they're very once again very useful on getting started. And really, it's just about trusting the process. And even when that critical part of your brain says that, if you can just, once again, why I think meditation is good, when you realize that's your ego talking, that's the defensive part of your brain not wanting the shift. If you can just let that, that's just noise, that's just static. I think you can get a lot of benefit just from that.
So how has hypnosis changed your life, or has it at all?
Oh, well, yeah, it changed. It's funny that when I first hypnotized someone, I felt I felt a shift on an energetic level. I felt like the only thing I could really describe it as, it felt like a lightning bolt shot up my spine. And I've never had an experience like that before or since, but it was, ever since going on that journey, like I said, I was able to just grow as a person in a way where even the people in my life, my family, my friends, saw me do a 180, and really just being able to take control and adapt. And I think hypnosis is great for that. It's a tool. You build a relationship with your unconscious mind. There's a misconception out there that it's this thing that if you think of the wrong thing, it'll screw you up. No, it always has your highest good in mind. It always has the best intention, even if it's if you have maladaptive coping techniques. That it's not because your unconscious mind wants to harm you. It's not. It's just the intention is there. So when you build that, and when I've learned to build that, and tap into that. Whether my anxiety, if I get anxious or something like that, when I can tap into that and really, once again, just program myself and interface with myself. I really think, when there's religions and spiritual systems that talk about that higher will, that true will, that ideal self, I think hypnosis can be a tool to achieve that. Um, really does extend your willpower to access part, almost just like control over your nervous system. If I from becoming the person I want to be to freezing out my arm when I'm getting a tattoo, it's such a versatile tool. So really the sky's the limit.
That's interesting that you said you can freeze your hypnosis, like mentally, subconsciously freeze your arm when you're having a tattoo. I've heard about monks who are in like such a deep state of meditation that they don't feel pain.
Oh yeah.
Press all that. So it's interesting. I wonder if, and I've not read anything that compares the both, but I'd like to see like how they're both working similarly. And like you've said, like meditation, hypnosis are really similar, but it'd be so interesting to see like a brain scan to see what parts of the brain are actually firing off.
There is a hypnotic state. Like I don't tend to use like digital levels of trance where it's like, oh, they're at level 3, and at level 3 this phenomenon happens. We're analog beings, and you can have extremely deep trance phenomenon happen in very light levels of trance, and you can have people who are like at the very basement of trance. But there is a process of hypnosis where you can reach what is called the S.2 state. The S.2 state is where I was in my training, I was put into it, and I was guiding other people into it. And what we would do is we would pinch a nerve on each other's arms when we would get them to that state. It's a very I forget where it is, but it's somewhere on your forearm. It's not a comfortable thing to be pinched at all. And like if you were to pinch it the way we were, it would be extremely painful. And when I went into that state, someone was just like, "Do you feel that?" And I didn't. It felt like my feet were on the ground, my arms were on the chair. I had no idea that my arm, you can actually get limb catalysis. My trainer, Mike Mindell, it's great hypnotist, great trainer. If you're actually ever interested in learning, I highly recommend people check him out. And he would have people's arms kind of lifted up in the air, frozen, and it looked like people were riding like big wheel choppers. But yeah, like it's just one of those things that I'm aware of monks, certain monks, even like qigong masters, being able to like heat water with their hands, or they'll even have competitions now where they'll put like wet towels on themselves and try and they can dry them. And the competition is like who can get their towel dry first. And a lot of this stuff was written off as like mumbo jumbo, but Wim Hof now, in a lot of cities around the world, you can learn this guy Wim Hof, where like through his breathing techniques, you can like swim in ice water, feel fine. So it's really like, once again, I think hypnosis is like it's an approach to the human mind that I think isn't too far shy of much more ancient approaches.
I have so many thoughts, so many questions, so many I studied history in university and I took the classics, and when you learn about the oh my goodness, what are they called, the oracles, you learn about the oracles, like a lot of them were on drugs, and that's how they were like making these prophecies. But I also wonder how many of them, because a lot of them were in trance too, I wonder how many of them were in hypnotic trances versus
I think those oracles, didn't they have like a gas leak somewhere, or they hung out on a mountain?
I think that was part of it
like
too.
there was a bunch of gas that they were essentially huffing 24/7.
Yeah.
And that's where the real historical, that's what Snopes need. People on a mountain, what's your source? Oh, the gas leak. But yeah, it's really interesting, like historically speaking, because I think in ancient Egypt there was these things called like sleep temples, and they would have like serpents in them, and the idea would be like you go to this temple to be healed, and back in ancient times where medicine isn't very advanced, but the idea of like going to this temple where the context is there for a person to have all these expectations, and they go to sleep in the healing temple, then they wake up and maybe their affliction is gone, especially if it's something that is physically based, or psychosomatic, and that's and that goes really like the healing aspect of trance, whether it's called hypnosis or not. I think that's an ancient thing. I think as long as we've been alive and telling stories and prayer and things like that, and I see a lot of overlap too. We have prayer, people who pray in the morning and at night. There are very big benefits to that, not just psychologically speaking, but in the context of like suggestibility. How you tend to be more suggestible right when you wake up in the morning and right before you go to bed. And I think I'm sure both of you are aware of like the importance of gratitude, whether you believe that for spiritual reasons or not. Like one thing I like to do with what I talk about, depending on my clients who are more, let's say, scientific and material, I'll shift to more like of that sanitized clinical language. But really, you're tuning your brain to be grateful, and that's a filtration thing. And people who are lucky, people who are grateful, are actually going to see more opportunities around them, and it's a filtration system. And once again, like, when do people practice prayer? When do people practice gratitude? To have the biggest effect, in my opinion, do it in the morning when you're waking up, doing it at night. Those mantras, those things you chant to yourself, that idea of like, I am thankful for this, or I am that. When you kind of chant that and you drift off into sleep, your brain starts to be like, okay, that's like, that's my reality, and it doesn't. And whether you want to do that for like reality manipulation techniques or whatever you might call them, or just if you want to feel good, gratitude, through that lens is another filter that you can apply. It's certainly like the right kind of. I think when we ask the right kind of questions to ourselves, as I said, like the thinker thinks and the prover proves, and when you ask the right questions, the prover, that's when your unconscious starts to work for you the most.
So actually taking action on those things. And
mm-hmm. Well, I'll actually I want to impart I think a really fun thing of wisdom. Now the law of attraction, which is something very popular over the past 10-15 years, there is actually a part of your brain that is sort of responsible for that, and that's the reticular activating system, and it's literally like the pattern filtration system part of the brain. And Christina, if let's say you were at a bar and there was rooms full of people talking, a lot of noise, a lot of stuff to like sift through, and someone calls your name, boom, out of all that chaos and all that noise, your name was able to be called. So when it comes to asking the right questions to get the right answers, asking the question why, why is an information gathering question, obviously, but it can actually have a negative effect depending on the context. Now, why is that building on fire? That's a pretty good question to ask. But
why is this always happening to me? Or
why is this always happening to me? Why is this, like why do people always leave, this and that? there can be some use for that, but if that's a question that you tend to use a lot, you're going to be getting your unconscious giving you more and more information to support that question. So if you think to yourself, why am I so stupid? Your mind's going to give you all, we all have those memories where we did something dumb. But if you ask yourself, how, that is such more of a productive question. And it once again, it filters information for us through our brain where like, how can I become more effective in my communication? How can I improve my life today? How can I, and that's going to give you all the answers that the most at least actionable and healthy answers. So that's another aspect of I think the mind and hypnosis that people should take into account.
So gratitude's not just about learning to feel blessed, but actually about making that literal mind shift.
Yeah, it's all about asking those rare questions and stuff like that. And I think once again, I sometimes like to future pace my clients with hypnosis, where I'll give them post-hypnotic suggestions where they might feel that sense of gratitude when they notice that light change. And well, what's a light change? Something very common that you walk down the street, you're going to see a bunch of lights change. If you see a stop sign, and sometimes I can actually pace my clients' upcoming experiences to have a more positive effect. So that's another thing.
So does that work with if you have clients that are triggered by certain things? Are you able to kind of shift their mindset that if you can identify the things that they're triggered by, kind of reverse that? Is that something that?
Yeah, that's I don't tend to necessarily specialize in that, but in neurolinguistics, NLP, there is something called anchoring, and there are ways to like re-anchor things. I think the swish method is a famous one. And Tony Robbins used to use it, but it's the idea of sort of bringing up the stimuli and then bringing up another memory that kind of overrides that memory and linking them together through certain stimuli. And that can, on a neurological level, as I said earlier, if the brain has the opportunity to feel good about something versus feel bad about something, it's going to move towards what feels good. And it's sort of like Pavlov's dog, on just sped up a bit with hypnosis. So yeah, and actually one thing I've really noticed with the human mind, and whether I'm working with other people or working with myself, is everything's relational. Like when you walk down the street and you have that random memory, just like boom, it just sidelines you, and there's no real it might be because like a certain sound plays or there's a certain smell and a mixture, and then your mind starts to once again, like neurons that wire together, and we can have these like random memories, and once again, like asking yourself the right questions, where like I can think of all the times I've failed, but I also can think of all the times I've succeeded. I have evidence for you'd be surprised, for anyone listening and struggling with something, there's a good chance you have evidence where you've already behaved in a way that as if you didn't have the problem that you're dealing with right now. I've had problems like that, certainly, where I can actually walk myself back and be like, you know what about these times? And it's evidence, right? Like the brain looks for evidence. So when we start to think that, and as you said, gratitude brings these things to the forefront. That's like really I know it's difficult for some people, especially people who are struggling, where it's like you should be grateful. I know that can feel like a bit of a slap in the face, but I think with working with clients, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm not going to talk about why you should be grateful, but let's do this little brain hack because I want you to feel good. And I think gratitude is a massively important tool that I think more people should learn.
Yeah, that's so important, because it's not dismissing their experiences or their feelings, but it's also, you're also kind of like allowing them to kind of bear witness to things that they might not have noticed. Like you said, the whole sock thing, like the sock on the left foot thing, right? Making them aware of the good things rather than the why me things. Yeah.
Well, I think really that's the key change is it's not in a secret phrase or something that I know. I mean, like I can give information all day, but it's within those, as you said, like those person's experiences. I think when they really start to tap into that, that's when the identity, when you make shifts on the identity level, the changes cascade at such a rapid pace. It's so crazy. I would say even, you could, to take a little more, maybe a metaphysical approach, if you want to observe the human as, or, the spiritual being, like our densest, most restrictive level is the physical world, right? I mean, like I can't move into 5 minutes ago. I can't walk into next week. I can be here and I can be now, and healing can take place there. But mentally, there's a little more malleability there. I can think about tomorrow. I can think about the past, and I can be in the present. And on a spiritual level, when these so-called metaphorical densities become less and less, when you change them on these higher levels, they cascade down into the present, and in such a way where it can be mind-blowing to see, because once again, like you change that way, your inner world, the outer world, just it'll match within days, hours. I've even seen it in minutes.
It's so fascinating.
It's so hard to believe too, because we've talked to other people on the show too that have said, like, as soon as I embodied this, or as soon as I truly believed it, or whatever, like it happened a few days later and it was instantaneous. And I think it's hard to kind of wrap your head around, or hard to believe, if you want to say believe, without having experienced it. But if you have experienced it, it's like it's mind-blowing, right? It's mind-blowing. And you're like, how did I not know about this all along? How have I not been doing this all along? Like the shifts that can happen.
Also, the power of it, there's a power in letting go, I think, too, when you trust the process.
Yeah.
And there is something that I'm a bit, it's an understanding, a bit of a scatterbrain. Like I'm very creative. Like I'm always jumping between like 20 different tracks, and that can lead to a bit of disorganization in my just life. And like anyone, we all misplace things. I actually use self-hypnosis to find things, and it works. It's freaky. So if anyone listening who knows self-hypnosis, I try this out, because it will scare you on how well it works. And the process, so the process is this: like if I'm missing, let's say, my keys, and I have no idea, like I'm, like, oh, I always put them there, but they're not there, and you get that frustration going. What I do is I just sit down, and I'll when I'm alone in my in my house, I'll just say, like, whatever hypnosis, I'll chant out loud whatever I want to focus on in hypnosis. So I'm like kicking a bus somewhere, I'll just say it in my head. But what I'll say is, like, I'm going to go in a trance, and I'm going to find whatever the object is, and I will only come out of trance until I'm ready, and my unconscious knows. And I do that, and sometimes it's like a minute or two, sometimes it's 30 seconds, and the better you get at self hypnosis, the more in and out you can do, and faster you can install things. But this is where it doesn't end, because if you stop there, it really won't work. And I'll keep like walking around and looking for whatever item is. It's the second I give up and I go, okay, whatever, and that focus shifts to something else, my body will like get up without me being aware and walk over and grab. Like I was looking for headphones, and I looked everywhere, and I was walking this whole time. I was walking around my headset, and my headset was on my exercise bike rather than on like my side table where it always is. And even though I tore apart the whole area looking for it, I did that. And the second I banished that, in a lot of like magical spiritual practices, there's that idea of banishing it. the second I gave up, I just walked over and grabbed it. Like before, my hand just knew it was there, and my unconscious once again just knew it was there. So really, once again, like that's, I think, the most hyper real like expression of that, trusting the process, you know, getting out there, you know, meeting people. You just never know what you're going to find. And I think when you really trust that process and you start to use tools like these, gratitude, self-hypnosis, you know, words of power, building new neural networks in your brain, reality will just, you know, warp and bend and twist in really fun ways.
I have to say, I've definitely, I mean, I've not used that process before, but I've lost things or misplaced things and thought, you know what, I'm just going to leave it. It'll turn up. Like I've been looking frantically for it. Like, where did I put it? I know I put it down here. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to leave it and it'll turn up. And it always does.
my little self-hypnosis ritual is essentially that, but it's just that on it's pouring jet fuel on the process. But yeah, I highly recommend it. It is a skill that I think that, you know, we should teach kids. I think we should teach, you know, meditation, things like that. There's a lot of skills out there that everyone should know, you know, like these skills aren't as, hypnosis is surprisingly easy to learn, you know. You'd be surprised, you know. You're never more than like a book or a DVD set away from learning about it. So that's another thing I highly recommend people do, you know.
And it seems like it's something that's so innate within us as humans, like that are connected to nature, you know, the energy around us. It seems like it's something that's, you know, it's all tied into that. And like we've lost it along the way. And we've said this many times as we've been recording, how we've become so disconnected from, you know, ourselves and like our innate abilities, because, you know, if everything that you are, like all the benefits that hypnosis brings us are true, and if it's so easy, and if everyone has accessibility to it, right? Like if everyone can do it on their own, then like to a degree, then, you know, then it is important to us.
Well, and that is true. And unfortunately, you know, like it can be used for ill. I'm not going to go on record being like, oh, it's mind control, because if hypnosis was mind control, I'd be a very rich man. But it actually, you know, like if you consider smartphones, right, like they hijack our focus, and they they can bring us into these negative thought loops, and you know, like practicing, I think, sanitary social media use, or even just taking breaks from it. You know, like they want to keep you on the app as long as possible, and you'll start to see, you know, like I try to set my like Instagram stuff to like just for like local events, for like music, and then just stuff related to hobbies that I do, whether that's art or stuff related to hypnosis, coaching, like important stuff like that. And when I see things that would annoy me, you know, I can filter them out, but I know that it's trying to keep us locked in. And you know, I think Nietzsche once said, like, man is at his best when he's unconscious. And when it comes to flow state, you know, athletes know how to do it. And in fact, when athletes hit those slumps, it's when they get in their own way, when they don't know how to tap into those flow states. In fact, you know, some of the most, you know, best performances I've ever had. I'm not a sports person, but I even remember I entered a flow state in, I think, like the 8th or 9th grade playing basketball, not athletic at all. And within about a minute, I scored like 6 or 7 baskets, and I wasn't thinking. And I don't have any athletic skill, but for some reason, shifting into this like relaxed state of focus, I was able to outmaneuver people who were much more skilled than I am. And yeah, it's fascinating. Certainly a fascinating aspect. And yeah, there are hypnotists who entirely focus on that flow state, whether it's for sports or business or, it certainly is another branch of this massive tree of trance, I guess.
Mhm. I tell you, you gotta get your mind in the game because it's so important for you to be so focused.
Hmm.
Yeah, like have the right mindset. Well, you've given us a lot of really good advice, a lot of really good information. But if you were to give our listeners like one piece of important advice, like leave them with something,
Hmm.
what would that be?
Well, that's a tough one, but
Greatest piece of
I already gave you all the good stuff, but I would really just say, you know, what if you're ready? Like, what if you are ready for that change? And I don't know what it is. And maybe you don't know either yet, but you might feel it. And if you felt that, how could you use that? How could you tune into that? And what would you notice over the coming days and weeks? And maybe it's a solution to a problem. Maybe it's a person you're going to meet. Um, Maybe it's a song that's going to open up something. But something is going to happen. And if you really focus on my words, you're going to notice it. Because all you have to do is notice it and ask the right kind of questions. How? So, how are you going to notice it?
So ask the how and not the why.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So if listeners want to connect with you or learn more about hypnosis, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on James Stephen Hypnosis on Instagram, and my name Stephen is spelled with a PH instead of a V. And you can also find me on Google if you type in James Stephen Hypnosis. You can find me on my page at jamesstephenhypnosis.ca, I believe. Because
Yep, it works. I went there. It works.
there, yeah. So you can find me on there, and on there is my personal contact number. So I tend to get back to you within an hour. A lot of times, I tend to get back, if at worst, a day. But yeah, feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram if you have any questions, or if you want to set up a consultation, whether that's over Zoom, Google Hangouts, just a phone call. Very flexible, and yeah.
Awesome. And we'll link everything in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Well,
Thanks for talking with us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Really, I had a lot of fun on this.
No, thank you so much.
That's it for our show today. Thanks for joining. Remember, you can always reach out to us on our socials, on Instagram at sisterhood_of_healing, or on TikTok at Sisterhood of Healing. We love to hear from you, so please reach out to us at any time. Thank you for journeying with us today. We'll see you next time.